Hey everybody, today is June 17th, 2024. Coming up on the show today, from Hitman, editor Sandra Adair.
I don't fawn over what the written word is, because in my experience, especially with Rick, is that by the time it's interpreted through the DP and the actors and Rick's direction, by the time it comes to me, I feel like it's not the same as it is on the written page.
And assistant editor Carissa Bronson.
This job was so fun. We talked about how this production was just kind of like the golden production where everything just went smoothly, like everybody was on their A game, everybody was having a good time. It's hard to not make such a fun movie when everyone is having such a fun time.
Yeah, we'll talk about that and a lot more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Okay, podcast time again. My favorite time. So happy to be here. So happy you're here. Thanks for coming. Got a fun one to talk about again today. One of those movies that tells you that yes, summer is actually finally here. And that is Richard Linklater's Hitman. And it stars and was co-written by Glenn Powell. It is currently streaming on Netflix and possibly still in the theaters where you are, so check that out too, because you always want to see these in the theaters if you can. Powell and Linklater wrote this on spec, meaning there was no studio behind this, nobody was paying for this, until it was done, that is. That's how it works. And now look at it, it's a big hit on Netflix. Hitman is a true story, well, somewhat true story as the title card will tell you, about a college psych professor who also works undercover with the local police department, posing as a hitman for would-be, I don't know, what do you call people that hire hitmen? Bad people, I guess. Anyway, this guy comes in posing as one, and then the cops bust him. Pretty straightforward. Until you put that story in the hands of Richard Linklater and Glenn Powell. Then it becomes something else very fun, very weird, and very unique. And when you've got something weird, fun, and unique, you are going to need a great editor to cut that for you. Luckily for Rick Linklater, he has such an editor, and has for a long time, dating back close to 30 years. And that is editor Sandra Adair. Sandra and Rick have collaborated on many a fine film, going back to Dazed and Confused, the Before series, or Before trilogy. See, if memory serves, that's Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight. I think I got that right. Anyway, great movies. And of course, there's Boyhood. Sandra was nominated for an Oscar for that one. And then they've done some more mainstream, plot-driven type films like School of Rock and Bad News Bears and Bernie. So they've covered a lot of ground together in their 30 years. Someone else Sandra has covered a little ground with, not quite 30, is her assistant Carissa Bronson. Sandra and Carissa have been working together for about 7 years, but in talking to them, you'd think they were together forever. And that is what we're here to do today, talk to them. And we will. But first, I want to talk to you about our friends and beloved sponsor, Extreme Music. As I know you know, those Extreme Music kids are the very best when it comes to production audio. What is production audio? It's audio for your production. Why is that important? Well, it's not, unless you want your film or TV show to sound amazing. Here's an example. Hitman takes place in New Orleans. Now, you could load up your film with a lot of B-roll of the French Quarter and Gumbo and Café du Monde and all that, but it would be so much more fun to fill your story with great jazzy New Orleans-type music. That's what Sandra did. And you can too, by going to extrememusic.com and just typing in the words New Orleans into their search engine. I know, I make it sound easy. Well, it is. You just crank that engine up by entering keywords like tempo, genre, lyrics, composer, instrumentation, stuff like that. They will give you backtracks and all kinds of different links and options for different instrumentation. You know, you want bongos, no bongos, go with the bongos. I always say go with the bongos. The point is you can customize it to suit your needs. And if you just get overwhelmed trying to think about what it is you want, we'll just show them what you want. Upload a reference track to Extreme Music and they will find you ones just like it. That's what you call artistic intelligence. And that is why it would be very smart of you, the next time you have a story to tell, to get your production audio from extrememusic.com. All right, we got a show to do, so let's do it. From Hitman, here's editor Sandra Adair and assistant/VFX editor Carissa Bronson. Beyond Austin, just legend.
Yeah,
Thanks,
definitely.
guys.
There'll be more fawning later. So Hitman started as sort of a pandemic project between Richard Linklater and Glenn Powell. When and how did Rick present it to you, and what notes did you have about the script when you read it?
You know, with Rick, I don't really get a heads up from him about anything. I just kind of start hearing the producers talking about it. It's in the air a little bit. And we were really excited to go back to the office after the pandemic because we cut Apollo 10.5 remotely. And I don't remember how I heard about Hitman. I guess it was from the producer. I don't remember.
Okay, so it starts as a rumor, and then eventually it becomes more of a real thing. And he does, I assume, hand you a script at some point.
Yes, after I ask for it, usually. I think he just assumes that everybody is taking care of everything and he doesn't have to be involved. So I probably got the script from the producer, Mike Blizzard. And my impressions of reading it were that it was really fun. It just read so smoothly and it just came across as being a really fun project. And I knew Glenn already from Everybody Wants Some, and also he was in Fast Food Nation years and years ago. And also he went to high school with my daughter. So I had met him in a creative writing class that I was invited to come speak to at Westwood High School. And I kind of knew who he was because he was in the theater department at the high school and all that. So when I saw him in Fast Food Nation, I was like, wait, I think I know that guy. And one little other tidbit about that, I went to the production office on Everybody Wants Some when they were just ready to start shooting, I think maybe 5 days before start of shooting. And I saw Glenn walking by and he had on his wig and he had this mustache and he saw me and he was like, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Adair." And it just cracked me up.
Well, I have to ask, when you saw him in that writing class, did you see a star in the making? Could you spot the potential?
Not really, no. I mean, it was just, they had me in and the teacher was asking me questions and I addressed the group.
Well, speaking of stars in the making, Carissa, I know about Sandra's long history with Rick. How about your history with her? I think you've been together for about 7 years now, 8 or so projects. How did you first meet and get the job assisting her?
That's kind of an interesting question because I feel like we tell the story differently. Like, I think Sandra and I remember how we came together in a different way. So my take is that I was working on my very first feature in the summer of like 2016. And my editor was friends with Sandra on Facebook. And Sandra had posted something about needing a hand on LETSCHER, her directorial debut. And my name was just kind of thrown into the ring and I got invited into the office to help out with like South by Southwest advertising and some finishing little touches on LETSCHER. And in that process, I got invited to be a production assistant on Last Flag Flying. So that was my first Richard Linklater film. And then we've been together ever since.
Do you take it upon yourself to be familiar with her roster of credits?
I was definitely familiar long before that happened. She had come actually and spoken in one of my college editing classes. And that was my very first encounter with her, I suppose, but we didn't actually speak at that time. So before she came into that class, our professor was like, you need to go home and you need to watch Boyhood and you need to be familiar with Dazed and Confused, and read us the riot act before she graced us with her presence. So I wouldn't say that I had to necessarily prepare at that time to go in for an interview with her. Because, I mean, she's an Austin legend. I think any female editor, and especially any editor in town, is familiar with her work.
Well, we probably have a little more to talk about with the role of the assistant and what Sandra looks for in an assistant, and we will get to that. But I wanted to share with you some observations, because I know you're dying to hear them, from me about Hitman. I think of the work that you've done in the past. I think about movies like Dazed and Confused, Everybody Wants Some, Boyhood. They're so character-driven and less dependent on any kind of rigid plot. So I often ask editors about, reference points from the director. And I think with those kind of movies, it's so hard to tie them to anything that came before because they are so much about the characters within. But with Hitman, it's very much a plot movie and a genre movie. So I think the reference question becomes a little more relevant, maybe not. But I'm watching the movie and I'm trying to think, okay, what does this remind me of? And there's a scene where Gary/Ron and Madison are in the tub together, and it hit me, it was Body Heat. And of course, Body Heat was about a woman wanting a lover to kill her husband. So what did Rick talk about with you in terms of, I'm thinking of this for Hitman?
This question is hard for me to answer because we really don't ever have those conversations. We rarely do. So when we start a film, hasn't always been the case, but now after 30-something years of working together, I get the script, I read the script, I have 1 or 2 conversations with Rick about the script being fun and energetic or a lot of twists, and we talk about music, and then we don't really talk anymore about it. He wants to make sure that we have the workflow going, that we know how we're going to get the dailies, and that post is set, but he really allows me to just have my first take on the footage. And honestly, I just don't remember having a conversation with him where he was like giving me film references or anything like that. So that's the truth.
You guys have worked together so closely for so long. I guess there's just so much shorthand and sort of ESP between you that you really don't need to have those conversations.
We did have those conversations on Boyhood.
Really?
Yeah, and we did have it on Dazed, because I didn't really know him at that time on Dazed. He was starting out with his first studio feature. It was my first solo studio feature. And so we did have conversations about American Graffiti and those kinds of films and how much music was going to play a part of it. But he came to Dazed very, very organized and prepared with cassette tapes of 1 million songs from 1976. And he was very specific that he didn't want to use any music that was published or played on the radio before the end of the school year of 1976, only at that time or later. And on Boyhood, we did have those conversations because we had so much time in between each year. We would talk about the characters and where it was headed because we didn't have a script of all the years. Those scripts kind of appeared year by year. So we did have a lot of time to talk about the tone of Boyhood and what the character arc was going to be for some of the characters. But on Hitman, we didn't really have that conversation, I don't think.
The screenplay is based on a real person and a true story. I think it was in Texas Monthly. Does it help inform you at all to read that article or learn more about Gary?
No, I didn't read the article. I still haven't. The thing about the Hitman script is it is based on the article up until the time that he meets Madison. And then the rest of it is fiction. That's Glenn and Rick coming up with the rest of the story. And I'm sure they talked about a lot of film references to each other while they were crafting the second half of the movie. So I didn't read it. I like to kind of put the script aside when I start. I use the script notes, the lined script notes, to kind of understand what coverage is covering which part of the scene. But I don't fawn over what the written word is, because in my experience, especially with Rick, is that once the actors get involved and those rehearsals take place and he works very closely with actors before there's ever even a camera on set, they know their character, they know exactly what they're doing. By the time it's interpreted through the DP and the actors and Rick's direction, by the time it comes to me, I feel like it's not the same as it is on the written page. So, of course, I use that as a guide, and I don't take liberties with lifting lines or lifting full scenes ever before he has a chance to see it, although I always have my little hit list of what I think should happen. I try to prepare the first cut with everything in there. At the very end, when we're assembling the whole cut before he sees it, I kind of ask my assistants to follow along in the script to just make sure I didn't forget to cut something. It's very helpful to do that because a lot of times I do skip an establishing shot or something that just gets lost in the chaos of dailies. And so that's a very helpful part of the process for me to just know that I've cut everything that was written. But I don't follow along line by line, that's for sure.
I don't know what it is, but I get the sense that, and maybe it's because you're all together there in Austin and you've all been working together for so long, that it's almost like this small company that's always in production. Like there's always something going on. Are you actually working on multiple projects at the same time at times, or is it always just one thing we're working on right now?
It's always one at a time. The only time where it's been multiple projects at the same time was Boyhood. And we made, I think, 9 other movies in the time that we made Boyhood.
That deserves an Oscar nomination right there alone.
Huh.
Carissa, when the film is winding up or film is starting up, what do you do to get Sandra prepared or the process prepared? Is it something that's just pretty much already in place, or is it a little different each time?
I think we kind of have the same system every time. The biggest thing that I feel like I have to get set up in our offices is our famous chart. We have a chart that we hang on the wall, and it's basically like the continuity. It usually takes up a whole wall in the office, and it'll have the continuity. So basically a little bitty description of each scene, and then 3 check boxes, as well as the date that we're expected to receive that footage. So we'll receive the footage, and then I will do my processing of it, get it set up for Sandra, and then I check my box. Sandra can check her box when it's cut, and then we check another box when we do the string out. So getting that chart set up is one of the bigger tasks. And then we just make sure our equipment's up to date and our Avid is still working on whatever the latest version of OS we've had to update to. We're on Avid 2018. We're big fans.
I've asked you already about the character-driven films like Dazed and Everybody Wants Some, Boyhood, and then School of Rock, obviously, and Bernie. Those are more like Hitman. I'm assuming that the process is very similar, but how would you compare cutting those 2 different types of films?
I think it's pretty much the same process for he and I, though I have to say on the before trilogy movies, I spent more time going through performance with him on those, I think, than some of the other films that were more just plot-driven. Because I don't know why, really. I think those may have had more variation in pitch from the actors. There's not a word of any of Rick's films that are ad-lib, even though they come across so natural and so like they're just coming up with these lines in the moment, but they're not. They're written and they're rehearsed. So in the performance that they actually film, there's always a large variation in performance in terms of the pitch. Like, especially in Before Midnight. There were some parts in Before Midnight where their fight that happens in the hotel room, that they are literally just shouting at each other. And there are some other takes where everybody's just, very tight-lipped and tense. And so I worked with Rick a lot on getting just the right tone for each section of those films. But on something like Hitman, he lets me use the script notes as my guide. We always have the script supervisor notate what his favorite takes are or parts of takes. And I try to use that a little bit as a guide to what he's going for, although I don't feel tied to that. So I'll put together the editor's cut and we'll show it to him. And then he will say, well, I have a lot of little notes. So we sort of start with little notes, like he will remember something that happened on set that I didn't include, or that he wants to use a different shot for the opening, or little things, what he calls little things. And we kind of do these rounds of notes where we go through the whole film and do all the little notes first, the things that are obvious to him. And then I give my notes to him of what I think should happen in terms of moving a scene or shortening a scene, or that I don't think certain lines are landing the way they need to, or jokes aren't landing. We'll talk about things that either of us perceive to be problems or that can be better. And then he'll go away and allow me to just execute those notes. And then we watch it again And then we just do round after round after round like that. By the time we're done, we've addressed everything that's bugging everybody. So on Hitman, there was a little bit more to the process than what we've done on some of the previous films. And that was that we had a series of screenings for families and friends or small preview audiences where we got a sense of how Gary's character was being perceived in terms of his transformation. So the amount of voiceover that's in the film now was not always there. There was some voiceover, but voiceover got added and rewritten. So that kind of helped us sculpt a more in-depth character of Gary. From the very beginning, I felt like we weren't really grounded in the nerdy Gary at the beginning. And so I was really happy when we started getting that feedback from other people that they weren't really seeing this huge transformation. So there was a lot of effort put into the beginning voiceovers to kind of boost up nerdy Gary.
Yeah. With our test audiences, they weren't really buying what is the true part of Gary's story. They were like, this guy is going to court and surely he's in the paper and there's no way that this could have really been happening. Like he wouldn't have been able to go undercover and make these switches. So by adding that title card at the beginning saying that this is a mostly true story, I feel like that allowed our audience to buy his transformation a little bit more too. Because we were like, this is the real part, guys.
Well, not just the elements that you add, but the timing of it as well. I mean, you're known for these projects that show how characters change over time, like the Before trilogy and Boyhood. They're shot over many years, so you have this physical transformation help reinforce the change in these characters. In Hitman, you got one movie in 2 hours to do it, and Gary certainly does undergo a transformation to get him to full rawness, I'll call it, for people that have seen the movie by the end. Is that something that you found yourself finessing a lot? Is like he's getting to be rawn too quickly or he's not rawn quickly enough?
Yeah, we moved some scenes around and we spread out. Initially, I think in the script, we had all of his disguised hitmen characters all together, one after the other. And we realized that it was seeming like all of this was happening in a week's time or 10 days. So we spread them out, kind of sprinkled them throughout so that we could see him doing other things in between. We moved a few scenes around, and I think that helped with the timeline.
Chris, I think I said it was like 7 years, 8 projects, somewhere around there between you and Sandra. Over that time, have you sort of established a process for how you like to organize the media for her or how to set things up so that when it comes time to make those big swings, it's not such a nightmare?
Sandra, the way that she likes things organized is very specific. We like to have things organized by scene, but also by day. So we have the option to see just everything that happened in the day. So sometimes they'll shoot B-roll for a scene, but it can be used better in another scene. And that helps when you can see the whole day. But in terms of making those big moves scene-wise, just the way our things are labeled, I think, allows it to be very visible on the timeline. So she can easily just see this is all scene 23.
Sometimes we label the bins with the name of the scene, like bird feeding or something like that.
Yeah.
So they're easy to find, the bin. And also the chart, the famous chart comes into play so much when we're moving scenes around because we can just look up on the wall and we have the entire continuity in script order. And we don't try to move anything on the chart, but we can see sometimes we use little tiny color-coded sticky notes that we can put on the chart if we need to. There was one film that we did together called Blue Miracle for a different director, and we used little green sticky notes on the chart to designate which scenes were heavy visual effects so that we could just anticipate that those scenes were going to be special.
Yeah. But it's nice to have that visual representation up right in front of us all the time. So we can see like, well, if we wanted to move this, like, would it fit between bird feeding and watering plants?
Yeah. I've had an assistant try to talk me into doing my chart digitally on Google Drive or something. And I think we tried it for a day. And then I was like, no, we got to have it on the wall.
We have a lot of analog processes in our office. I mean, line script, like we print that out every day. We print out script notes. We're very much so tactile folks in our office.
So the film takes place and was shot in New Orleans. You're Austin-based.
Yeah.
I don't assume that you went on location for this, but does that ever occur? Will you go on location with Rick?
I have been on location with Rick, but since the pandemic, no. I mean, when we did Bad News Bears, we were in LA. When we did Me and Orson Welles, we were in Isle of Man and London and School of Rock in New York. You know, I have been on location with him, and he likes me to be there so that we can work weekends, as he calls it, so I can show him cuts of scenes and stuff like that. But since we've been using Vimeo and Frame.io and Zoom, Apollo 10.5, it was during the pandemic. I was here, he was at his place, and we would just get on a Zoom call every day at 6:00, and I'd show him what I had cut that day, and we would talk about it, and I'd take little notes. So the secret is out that editors can work remotely, and that allows them to not have to put that line item into the budget for travel and housing and editing systems on a remote location. So Carissa and I were in Austin. Rick and the whole crew were in New Orleans.
And Carissa, did you have to manage any of that dailies process?
Yeah.
What role does the assistant play in that part of it?
So we worked with a company called Light Iron in New Orleans. They have an LA location as well, but we worked with the one specifically in New Orleans, and they were fabulous. They were so organized. And so they were actually doing the dailies and the proxy creation and then sending it to us via Spera, I think. And so just every morning I would download that footage and go through and make sure that we had all the clips that were on our paperwork that we received. It lined up with our script supervisor's notes, and make sure that the lengths were correct as well. Cause there was a couple times where like a Spera would something would glitch, something along the pipeline of long things would glitch. And we would get a short clip. And I'd be like, why does this cut off mid-take? So yeah, it was very important to make sure that first thing in the morning, everything was there so that they could wipe cards on their side and move on to the next day.
So as I said, the film takes place in New Orleans. The needle drops. Jelly Roll Morton, Dr. John, Buckwheat Zydeco, Leon Redbone. So right from the very first title slide and that Jelly Roll Morton tune comes up, it's like, we're in New Orleans. It's going to be fun. It's going to be quirky. And it's just a very efficient way of setting the scene, so to speak. Tell me about the needle drop process and how you work through that, either with Rick or amongst yourselves or with a music supervisor. How did that all come to be?
Yeah, we had many lists of songs that people love from New Orleans. So I have a friend from New Orleans who made these tapes called Louisiana Mudslide. And every year he would make a compilation of songs from New Orleans and he would send his friends the cuts. And so I remember I didn't even know who Alan Toussaint was before I started listening to those Louisiana Mudslide compilations that he sent. So I had those to start out with, and I talked to him and I told him we were going to be shooting in New Orleans. He was like, oh, anything you need, just let me know. Also, Austin Emilio, one of the actors in the film, he had a huge playlist that he gave Rick. And then at the end of the production, all the crew and cast members kind of made a giant Spotify list of songs that they had learned to love during their time on location. So I had a huge amount of songs. And when I'm selecting music for a film for a specific place, I'm always looking to set the vibe. Like that is the most important thing. And having a certain amount of instrumental part of the song usually to help sculpt while I'm cutting with the music. So I've selected some pieces for the hitman. For people who haven't watched the movie, there's a certain visual effect that we've used to put these people that are getting arrested on a wall. Carissa and I worked a lot with the music, trying to get those to fit where we wanted them to land. And, we just cut the hell out of the music, really. But from the very beginning, we found some great songs on those lists for the opening. And then we also had a composer, Graham Reynolds, who has worked with us on multiple films. And he filled in some of the pieces of music that have to just kind of play underneath and underscore what's happening in the movie. But the music was really fun. Man, there's so much great music to select from when you have that huge body of fun music.
Something that you do to speed things along are montages. One really fun one is him explaining what a hitman is.
Yeah. So in the script stage, the opening voiceover talked a lot about that hitman weren't real. And we had a totally different opening at the very beginning of the whole process. Once the opening was reconfigured and rethought, Rick was like, he wanted to do it. Rick just wanted to do that montage. He had the idea. He had a good idea where it could go. And he also had movies in mind. So Murder by Contract, this, that, and the other. He had a whole list. And we set Carissa on that quest to find the clips. And actually, Carissa cut that whole section while I was working on something else. And she did a fabulous job.
Thank you.
But yeah, we had the music for her to use for that. And then we got the voiceover. And then she just pulled the clips and worked with Rick directly on cutting that montage. She found the Hitman novels.
The book covers.
And we had a big laugh about that, those covers. And Rick was thrilled to see them. And then he started going, oh yeah, there's this book and that book. Try to see if you can find these other things. So it was really a collaboration with Rick and Carissa putting that whole thing together.
One of the fun parts about that is we had a long conversation about what's a hitman versus an assassin. We're trying to make the point that hitmen aren't real, but we didn't want to cross in the line of assassins. And Rick was very specific about the media we chose there.
These are the conversations you don't imagine editors and assistants having. Hitmen versus assassins. That's why we do these interviews. The film obviously has a theme of duality. There's some really nice inserts here of street intersections. There's the intersection of desire and law. And then after he has his tryst with Madison, I think it's piety and pleasure is the other intersection. I had to look it up. These are actually intersections in New Orleans, which amazed me. So he has those insert shots. Is that something that was just sort of a happy accident that they went out and found, or was that always scripted?
No, those were not scripted. Those were things that they shot. We had a lot of B-roll, a lot of water, a lot of, boats on water, swampy things, and a lot of street signs. So those just were B-roll. They had footage of the French Quarter, which Rick absolutely did not want to use. We even at the beginning had some stock footage that was shot in New Orleans at Mardi Gras and all of that. That all got tossed. So yeah, those were things that I think they discovered when they were there. They probably had a location manager who said, oh, you should shoot this, this, and this. I think Austin Emilio knew the city pretty well. I don't know that for sure. But anyway, those were not scripted, to answer your question. We just found great places to pop them in, and they work great. The piety and pleasure gets such a laugh. It's really kind of thrilling. When you create something in the cutting room and you think it's funny, and you really like it, and Carissa and I think it's clever, and then Rick sees it and he thinks it's clever, it's very gratifying and validating when an audience laughs. That does not always happen.
No, it doesn't. And you already said there really wasn't any improv, but there's a scene between the characters Phil and Claudette. These are Gary's partners on the police force. They're riffing back and forth as to what they would do to be with Ron, Gary's persona he uses with Madison. I also wondered, was this improv?
It was not improv on the day. I don't think I wasn't there, but I know that Retta came up with the line that she would rip her IUD out for Ron. It's a really funny line. She may have come up with that on the day or in rehearsals, but I know that I don't think that was written into the script.
It was definitely in rehearsals because she said that line in every take. But I do know that that's a Retta original.
There's an example of being really funny in a movie that gets really dark. We talk about this in every interview. It's unavoidable, and that's the tone question, because even if I don't ask it, an editor will bring up, well, the big challenge was the tone.
Yeah. We did really concentrate on getting the nuances of his transformation as a person who has really opened up his identity to embrace this other character, Ron, who Madison is in love with. And there are a lot of nuances in making that smooth. And I think music and score helped a lot, especially once Gary/Ron discovers that she has killed her husband. Spoiler alert. Sorry about that. But once he discovers that, the rest of the film is just kind of starts spiraling into getting more and more and more dark, even though there is that really funny scene. He's bugged and he goes with the cell phone to her apartment. The score hit the nail on the head. It's just eerie. There are certain parts of the score that just get eerie. And I used that piece of music that Graham came up with when he puts the plastic bag over Jasper's head. I got real hung up on that music because I thought it absolutely is the perfect tone for this. It's not your normal dark music, but it's dark enough that it's leading you into that feeling of like, oh God, something bad is going to happen right now.
With a genre movie, a lot of times the audience is a step ahead of what's going to happen. I mean, it's the formula, and it's really about, well, how well did they execute it? In the case of Hitman, I was surprised every time. Is this really happening? Is this a dream? Is there a gag waiting behind this? You know, as you're crafting this and you know that this is where it's going to end, is that something else where you're thinking about subverting the audience's expectations?
No. I mean, I would love to take credit for that, but I don't think I can, because I think it was written that way and performed that way. And, you know, I'd love to say we created all of that in the editing room, but we didn't. That's one of the reasons why I respect Rick so much and I love working with him, is because he's so thoughtful, and he's, you know, I think he's just as much of a writer as he is a director, and especially on films that he has written and directed. I feel like the writer comes out in him so much in the process of directing. And he's extremely thoughtful and very, very well versed in film history. I mean, he remembers every film he's ever seen, the year, the director, who's in it, what it was about, what it looked like, who shot it. I mean, he's a walking encyclopedia of film. So he and Glenn were very cognizant about what they were doing. And then when the film goes through Rick's brilliant directing mind, he knows how to shoot it so that it's not a dog and cat fight to put it together. You know what I mean? I'd love to take credit, and I do take credit for how it turned out working, but I think it was planned that way.
Carissa, editors often say, I have my assistant do that part. And they're usually talking about sound and sometimes temp effects, things like that. We already talked about the great work you did on the Hitman montage, but you're also credited with being the VFX editor on the film. What made up most of the VFX work on this film, and what was your process for managing that in addition to all the other things you had to do?
Most of the VFX happen there at the beginning of the film when Claude and Phil are in the van, and you see it's his first meeting with Craig when he's Billy. So they're watching on those screens. Those were most of our visual effects. We're getting the correct moment in the Billy Craig conversation on those screens, and you see them moving around the little joystick. And so we wanted to make sure we were mimicking that movement on the screen. So just making sure that those were framed up properly. Rick was very specific about where he wanted them on those screens. We had a lot of reflection on Gary's glasses. It's a lot of subtle details.
Also, the mugshots. That was like a whole big thing because the way they shot the mugshots was not the way Rick had envisioned them. So there was a lot of fixing to do to get the mugshots the way that Rick wanted them, the height chart.
That height chart was a huge thing. Sometimes they would shoot it and it would say that they were like 7 feet tall. And so we wanted to, kind of bring them down a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also Rick kept telling us, go and look up a bunch of mugshots. Like, what are they supposed to look like? Go and research mugshots and let's see if we can do that. So we realized, well, some mugshots have the measuring stick for height, but some mugshots are on like a cinder block wall. And if you imagine that Gary / whatever character he is going around different parts of Louisiana, then not every location is going to have the exact same chart.
True.
So he wanted, a big difference in the way the charts look, the walls look, the lighting look, all of that. So Carissa worked real hard on making that happen.
Yeah. We experimented with them holding the little placards or maybe having like a digital imprint, and none of that kind of stuff stuck. But it was very important to make sure that they didn't all look like they were photographed in the same place.
I know it was a lot of work. It had to be, but it also sounds like a lot of fun, at least the way you two describe it. Was there an aspect of this film or any part of your job that you consider to be the most fun, most rewarding part of it?
Oh, that's such a big question. This job was so fun. We talked about how this production was just kind of like the golden production where everything just went smoothly. Like everybody was on their A game. Everybody was having a good time. It's hard to not make such a fun movie when everyone is having such a fun time. So seeing all of these little tiny details that we put into this film and then sitting in a theater and hearing someone go, oh, that is extremely rewarding because you're like, oh, you get it. Like you got that tiny little thing that we did. So that's beautiful.
You're the perfect people to answer this question that I get from younger people all the time. I want to be an editor, but I don't want to move to LA, or I can't move to LA. And here you two are, Austin-based, having a great time, making great movies. What would your advice for them be about the path to becoming a successful film editor or assistant editor when LA is not really an option for you?
Well, I would tell and do tell people, get in an editing room. It doesn't matter where. Just get somewhere where you can cut a film and collaborate with other people. It doesn't matter if it's a student film, a women in film project, or a commercial. Like, just try to get in the cutting room somehow. Volunteer to work as a post PA. I mean, to tell you the truth, there are some post-production houses here in Austin, and there are a number of editors, feature editors, a few. And there are a lot of documentary filmmakers here. Carissa worked with a documentary film editor before she came and started working on narrative films. I mean, I think you just have to get the experience in the room. And people have to know your name. I always tell people your name is all you have. Like, you have to protect your name. You have to do good work. You have to show up. You have to be reliable. So do all that stuff and then be in the cutting room where you can meet people. That said, I know a lot of people who get a little bit of experience in Austin and they do go to LA, and some of them stay there and some of them come back. Carissa, what do you think?
This is always a tricky question because I do get asked this a lot. And my advice is that, like, your name, your attitude is a huge thing, especially in such a little town like Austin. If you have a bad attitude, people are going to know that, and it's not going to help you very much. But I also recommend to assistants to just try to learn and absorb everything you can. Like, you need to know Avid, you need to know Premiere, After Effects is a plus, DaVinci is a plus. You want to be able to put your hands onto everything. Like being able to work with visual effects has been really helpful for me because it's just a bonus. So having those little bonus talents, skills is vastly helpful.
Yeah, I always say an assistant needs to know all the technical stuff because editors cannot be bothered. At least this editor. I do not want to deal with it. I don't want to know how many pixels. I don't want to know, this version or that version. I want my assistants to know all of that before they ever come to work for me because I depend on them to know it. Recently, I was working on a different film, not a Rick film, with a different assistant, and he went out of town, and I had a drive that I had some soundtracks on that I wanted to use. The director plugged in the drive, and he must have knocked something when he was in the hard drive, and everything went red, everything went offline, and he and I looked at each other like, oh no, Nathan's not here. What are we going to do now? And, we got it back. But I was like, oh my God, if something disastrous were to happen and my assistant wasn't there, I'm not quite sure I could always repair the situation.
Well, those are both great answers to close on. They were all great answers. It was a great movie. And, here's my take. I think you're both Austen legends.
That's so sweet.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. It's been really fun to talk to you.
Yes, two legends. Two Austen-based legends making great movies. What a treat it was to finally get to talk to Sandra on the podcast. I had thought I had done it before, but I guess I'd only interviewed her in person. And even better, we got to talk to Carissa as well. So thank you, Austen-based legends Sandra Adair and Carissa Bronson. It was great having you on the show, and I learned a lot. I hope everyone listening did too. Something else you might have learned is that Sandra and Carissa used Avid Media Composer to cut Hitman. Maybe you want to have a career as a hitman or hit person. Well, that would be weird. Don't do that. A better choice would be to be a great editor. And a better choice on top of that would be to use Avid Media Composer to do it. Better to use Media Composer to make Hitman than to be a hitman, I always say. And it's never been easier for you to do that. Great new features and functionality being added all the time. I know there are some great new AI-enhanced features coming out. Won't tell you what, you're just going to have to go see for yourself. How are you going to do that? Well, it's easy. You just search for Media Composer in your little browser thing. Or you can click the link in the show notes. That always helps. Either way, make sure your editing career is on the right track by staying up on all the latest with Avid Media Composer. Let's see, what is today? The 17th? I said the 17th, didn't I? Yes. Why do I bring that up? Well, it's getting close to the holiday season or the summer season. The rough cut schedule could be a little iffy here and there, but I do expect to be back next week. We'll see about the one after. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.